Assalamu alaikum viewers. As you know that the global halal industry is growing exponentially. And of course, the North American halal industry is no exception. There are a lot of manufacturers which are getting halal certificates for their products so that they could sell them to their target markets in different regions of the world. Today we're going to introduce to you one such halal certification body which issues halal certificates to these manufacturers in the US as well as in Canada. The name of the company is Halal Watch World. It was established in 1985, and today we're going to discuss a lot of issues about this industry with the president and CEO of this company. So let's talk to him. First of all, really appreciate the time you've taken to speak with us. And Alhamdulillah, you are one of the most important industry players as far as the halal certification is concerned. And the very first question which I wanted to ask you is, could you please let us know a bit about yourself and how you got involved in this industry in the first place, and of course in the company which you're working, Halal Watch World?
Absolutely. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. My name is Mansoor Rafiq Umar. I've been working in this industry more permanently for the last 5 years or so, but I've really been involved in a much smaller capacity since 2013. This is actually the year that my father got very sick. So at that time, I actually had to start from scratch. So it was something that I actually had to pick up and learn from others and study. And I actually studied for 4 years. So I studied from 2013 all the way to 2018. And I studied Deen al-Islam, Ulum al-Quran, Mustalah Hadith, Usul al-Fiqh, and so forth, all of the different sciences of Islam. And I studied in the country where halal certification began. And the first halal certification agency in the world is the city that I studied in. And it's a very prominent organization, which is the MJC, the Muslim Judicial Council of Cape Town. I was able to speak with the late Rahimahumullah, Maulana Taha Karan, who just passed recently from COVID-19. He was a giant in the space of law for halal, law for all different sorts of banks and the banking industry, the financial industry. He was really a powerhouse. And alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me the permission and the blessing, the barakah, to study underneath him and learn from him and sit with him and really go deep into a lot of these matters so that I would have a proper foundation. And when I came back, I implemented all that I had learned and over the years and built a very strong certification agency that is still growing today. Alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah. When was this Halal Watch World was established in the first place?
So it was first established in 1985. Back in 1985, it was actually a newsletter, to be perfectly honest. And it was a newsletter to kind of an expose on the halal industry and the things that were happening around the country. From there, it morphed into a certification body for manufacturers to allow people to have and consume halal foods.
And what's the halal certification process you're using to certify your customers?
We have 4 primary principles. Those principles are: number 1, sanitation; number 2 is traceability; number 3 is integrity; and number 4 is composition. All of the different matters of certification fall under these 4 core principles. Any matter that you can think of, any concern that you can think of with halal food, whether it's contamination or whether it's something has been dropped or some organic organisms, all of it is covered under those 4 principles. And how they break down is basically this. So sanitation is that we are concerned with sanitation of the equipment in the facility, sanitation of the halal product handlers, so the people who come into contact with the food, sanitation of the actual product itself, making sure that it's clean and all of its ingredients and its packaging and so forth. So in industry, you have certifications like SQF and HACCP and GMP, right? Good manufacturing practices, and sanitation from the city that'll come for a restaurant. All of those different standards are based more or less on microorganisms like pathogens, E. coli and salmonella and so forth. We are concerned with those things in terms of the health and safety of the food,
Right.
but our primary concern is contamination from the halal perspective. And that means anything that is animal derived, that is not killed according to Islamic ritual principles, any pork derivatives or any other animals that are carnivorous or that have fangs that are not allowed to be slaughtered or to be eaten, any alcohol or intoxications or intoxicants. All of those things are concerning in the halal environment, the halal product facility, the HPF. That is essentially anywhere where halal products are being produced, managed, manipulated, modified, transported, and so forth. All of that falls under the banner of halal product facility. That is sanitation in a nutshell. The second principle is traceability. There's internal traceability and there's external traceability. So internal traceability is essentially that the halal product facility must have demarcations, tags, signages that essentially ensure that the halal product within that facility is not accidentally mislabeled or put in the wrong place or sent out improperly. Make sure that the halal products are fully under control in the guise of the individuals who are in charge of the products. So that is the traceability internally. Then there's also traceability externally to the facility. Traceability externally means that the products themselves, all of their ingredients must be traceable. So we must be able to establish a link all the way from the producer of the finished product to the manufacturers who provide the raw materials, all of the way down the chain to wherever they came from. That link is established through documentation, through invoices, sales receipts, a multitude of different items, that documentation that show us where this product's ingredients came from. Number 3 is integrity. And this is one of the most important principles. Number 1, it is integrity of the system. And then there's number 2, integrity of the personnel who are in charge of that halal system.
Right.
So according to our standard, which we've developed, integrity for the system is essentially a halal system that has to be implemented within the facility. That means that the system or the facility is conducive to producing a halal product. So it's either conducive to producing a halal product or conducive to maintaining the integrity of the halal product. So in other words, if a halal product comes into this halal system, so if it comes in halal, it must leave halal. And we have a number of measures to ensure that that is the case and that it is absolutely being shored up. Number 2, the integrity is of the personnel. So what we have is with each facility, a halal enforcement director is elected. Now, the halal enforcement director is essentially the individual who is tasked with ensuring that that halal system is functional. Those individuals are trained. We ensure that they know what they're doing. Generally, they're Muslim. And they are essentially the brains behind. So they make sure that that system is in place. And we have documentation to make sure that they're fulfilling that. Now, that's just one form of a check, the halal enforcement director. Then we also have directors and individuals who visit the facilities on a regular basis. So that may be on a monthly basis, maybe on a quarterly basis, or could be an annual basis. And that's all based on the risk level of that facility. Some facilities are high risk, they're deemed high risk, some are deemed medium risk, and some are deemed low risk. And all of that plays into that. And lastly is composition. Now, composition is just essentially what are the products made of, what are all of their raw materials, and we do a full report on each of those ingredients to ensure that they are compliant with the halal standards and Islamic principles.
Generally speaking, people think that maybe halal is for Muslims only. But by talking to you, it looks like halal could be for everybody. What's your impression on this?
All of our documentation, we never say the Muslim. We never say that halal is for the Muslim. In fact, we say halal is for the halal conscious consumer. So it's a term that we coined because it's really very inclusive, right? It includes anybody that is concerned about their food and where it comes from. Anyone that is concerned about not having human amino acids in their foods, or not having their sugar strained through bone char that is made of pig or khinzir, making sure that the animals that they are eating are not being fed other animals themselves, right? So they're not being fed carnivorous foods, which leads to other diseases and other problems, right? So food is not only an important thing for Muslims, but it's an important thing for everybody. The more time goes on, we see that the level and the standard of sanitation, of concern and care for food across the world is constantly elevating and lifting up.
And who are your target customers?
Actually, our customers are really two. We kind of stand in the middle of between two parties, between two consumer bases. We're like the medium that translates information back and forth between the consumer that goes to the store, the retail consumer who goes to the store and purchases products, who maybe orders online or goes to a restaurant and eats that food, and the businesses that sell that food. So Halal Watch World, we really sit in between that position. It's a fine balance that has to be had because we want to be extremely strict for the sake of the consumer, but we also want to make sure that our process is also practical, that it can be carried out and fulfilled by a facility, by a business. So it's an interesting and a delicate balance that we play, but we're really looking after both. We're looking at the clients, at the facilities, manufacturers, restaurants, distribution facilities. We're looking at slaughterhouses. We're looking at all of these different types of facilities, and we're saying, are you compliant? And we're making sure that the facility and the system that's in place is compliant for the consumer who we relay information to. We write articles, we freely share documentation, and we freely share research documentation, not client information. We share information that is pertinent to the halal conscious consumer. Like, for instance, we do a research report every year that talks about what a Muslim or a halal conscious consumer should consume, what types of products are not allowed to be consumed, what types of ingredients should people be aware of, what should they be conscious of, what should they be careful of. And, we write articles also to demystify things like many people think certain items are haram or are not allowed to be consumed, they're not allowed to be eaten, but in fact, they're okay. So we really have a dual consumer base, and that's primarily where we work with.
So do you make any unannounced visits as well to the manufacturer just to make sure that actually they are following the procedures which they are supposed to as far as the halal certification is concerned?
Yeah, so we have the permission to visit any facility at any time. We may do so. We may walk in unannounced. That's completely fine. Businesses, they tend to have a schedule of their own. Maybe they're not. And that is something that we write in the contract to ensure that the facilities know that at any point in time that they can be visited.
So, for example, let's suppose that I'm a food manufacturer and I have recently got halal certification from you. Can I start exporting my halal products to any country in the world?
If the company has gained certification from us, generally speaking, yes, they can send their products anywhere across the world. There are certain countries that require special permission or special approval for that particular region. And we work with the companies to ensure that product is compliant and according to those particular standards so that the product can enter the country without any issue. So yeah, without a problem.
So what are the common problems you faced during the initial certification audits?
I think most facilities, once they go through our process, they're very clear on compliance issues, but it might have to do more with the knowledge of the individuals, right? Them being clear on what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. Because we're dealing with modern systems, and modern systems are always changing. And because of that, we always have to make sure that our clients know exactly what it is that they are allowed to do with new issues and new products. So like, for instance, there was an issue where a company was making a product that was essentially meat grown in a lab. So they would take a meat protein from an animal and they would essentially grow it in a petri dish. The issue of that was, is it halal? Because it wasn't an animal that was slaughtered. It was just grown in a lab. So can we eat it? And the reality is, it really depends, right? If that meat is grown in a lab, but its source is haram, then it's a problem. But if its source is not haram, then it may not be a problem. So we ask the question, where does the meat come from? If that meat, that lab-grown meat, came from an animal that was not slaughtered according to Islamic ritual rites, then that would not be permissible, because that meat is already najis. It's already filthy. It's already not allowed to be consumed. But if it came from an animal that was halal, to be eaten, and it was killed properly, then it's acceptable. But then others may ask the question, they say, well, what happens if that meat is coming from an animal which is living? So then it was never slaughtered. We address that issue. We address that question. Well, the Prophet ﷺ, he spoke about this. And he speaks about an animal, a sheep, where there was a practice where the buttocks would be cut off from the animal and the tribesmen would eat that food. And so he addressed that and said that it is haram. It is impermissible to take anything from a living animal without it being slaughtered, and to take pieces from that animal and eat that. Whatever is cut from it is maytah. It is dead meat. So I think, to answer your question, really, it has to do with keeping up with the times and knowledge, to make sure that everyone who is involved in the halal process, that they're knowledgeable about current events and how we answer them as Muslims and from in Islam.
Do you provide your halal certification services internationally as well?
So now, we do not certify companies that are not within North America. It really does depend, because there are, there may be special cases where a company is not that far outside of our region, but close enough where we can still access the facilities. But generally speaking, no, we do not certify companies outside of our region.
So what are the industries which you're currently touching?
We really deal with a broad spectrum of industries. So we have companies that produce halal cosmetics. We have companies that produce halal chemicals, halal lipsticks, halal packaging material, even, because a lot of packaging material people don't know. There are stearic acids or amino acids that are coming in between the sheets to make sure they don't stick. Also nutraceutical, pharmaceutical industry as well. There are many, many, many different areas. And why it's important is because halal is not just about consumption. It's a lifestyle, but it really involves three primary areas. That is, number one, consumption, number two, transacting, and number three, utilization. And what that means is, am I allowed to consume this item, or am I allowed to transact this item? Can I buy and sell it? Can I purchase it and sell it? Or am I allowed to utilize it? And all of those questions really covers many, many additional areas and spectrums.
For example, if I'm a food manufacturer, why should I get halal certification?
Yeah, certainly. A very good question. Really, we're seeing a major uptick in halal certification within the last 10 years. And I think companies are realizing two things, not only from a literal perspective, but from a figurative perspective as well. It makes sense to cater to a population of nearly 2 billion people that have not been catered to, right? People who are concerned about their consumption and their halal conscious consumers, they've been ignored for so many years. Actually makes dollar sense to become halal certified, because then a company is able then to offer to everyone. They can offer their products all over the world and to anyone who's really concerned about that type of thing, while also offering a premium product. And that just makes sense, right? It's logical. Really, companies that get in early on in this stage, they're the benefactors, right? You always look at investments, and people always look back 10 years and they say, well, I wish I had gotten in, in the beginning, I would be the benefactor. And in reality, that is the halal industry, because it's constantly growing. We're talking about $3, $4, $5 trillion industry, and growing every year exponentially. For companies to not gain halal certification, it's actually a major mistake on their part. They're really missing out. But those who have been in it for years, they see the benefit of it. They see that for sure. And, we can also speak about the social reality of that too. Not only is it a dollar cents question, but it's also an answer for catering to people, for opening. What does it say if you say to your consumer base, I'm going to offer a product to you as well. What does that
Mhm.
say? That tells the consumer that you care about them. As a
Sure.
manufacturer or as a restaurant or as a slaughterhouse, it shows that you care about not just one segment of the world, but you care about everybody. And I think that speaks volumes, because that's really why a lot of companies are going gluten-free or organic or non-GMO and all these different sorts of things, is to show consumers that, well, we don't just care about our profit, we also care about you as a consumer as well.
That's right.
So.
And one last question before I let you go. For example, I got a halal certification from you. So what are the major markets which you think I should be able to export my products to?
There are Muslims all over the world. Products are being sent to Nigeria, they're being sent to Japan. As you know, all industry is growing big in Japan, right? China and all over the world. Of course, there are certain regions that have much higher, much stricter rule sets. That's not a halal or haram question. Rather, it's more an issue of governance, politics, where a product is allowed to go and where it's not allowed to go, or who's allowed to certify for this particular region or not. A lot of that has to do with politics, which is unfortunate, but there are hundreds, I believe over 200 countries in the world. All of them can be exported to, barring a couple that require additional requirements.
Thank you so much for your valuable time.
Absolutely, Jazakallah for having me. I really appreciate it. And
thank you
just
so much.
Let me know if you need anything else. I'll be here.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh.